Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we continue our exploration of meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. Your support is greatly appreciated. Kindly like and share this audiobook to extend its reach, enabling more individuals to access its profound wisdom. Remember to subscribe to our channel for instant notifications when new content is released. Together, we can propagate the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, nurturing a community focused on enlightenment and inner serenity. We thank you for being a part of our mission to make these transformative teachings accessible to all. Let's commence today's reading. A Mind Without Inertia. February 13, 2010. The texts tell us that when the Buddha was newly awakened, he surveyed the world. On the one hand, he saw how everyone was aflame with passion, aversion, and delusion, burning from these things, and he felt compassion. But then he reflected on the Dhamma he had discovered. He was struck by how much it went against what people would want to hear, how subtle it was, how hard it would be for them to understand. He almost gave up on the idea of teaching. It was only after a Brahma's invitation and the Buddha's own reflection that there would be people who would understand that he taught. Notice the dynamic there. There was the compassion, but there was also the realization that it was going to be very difficult. He needed to be convinced that the effort was worthwhile. That was why he taught. One of the main problems he faced was that the fire burning away in our minds is something we really like, in particular the fire of passion. When the Buddha says that we're attached to sensuality, it's not so much sensual things that we're attached to. We're attached to passion for sensual thoughts, our obsession with sensual thoughts. We love to think about sensual pleasures. If we can't get one sensual pleasure, well, we're happy to think about another one. But we're really attached to the thinking, even though it makes us suffer. We think of passion as a good thing. A lot of people say, "How could you live without passion?" Think about that for a minute. What does that mean? We need the oomph of passion to overcome an awful lot of inertia. To live is to struggle. We have to feed, we have to provide for the needs of the body. This is one of the reasons why we're taught to repeat the contemplation of the requisites every evening. We have this need for food, clothing, shelter, medicine. If the body were perfectly complete, we wouldn't need these things. But we're born with a big lack, a whole flurry of needs. Our parents provide for us when we're young, but there comes a point where we have to provide for ourselves. And it's not easy. And it's not just our own effort that goes into providing for ourselves. There's a lot of suffering on the part of other people, other beings, that goes into the fact that we need food to eat. Even if we were all vegetarians, farmers would still have to work at growing the food, transport workers would still have to bring the food from the farm to market, people would still work in the market. People would still have to cook. All these people would be involved in a lot of effort. This holds not just for food, but also for clothing, shelter, medicine. There's a long chain of suffering that goes into providing these things. Yet even when the body is fully provided with these things, it's still full of aches and pains. The pains of hunger hit every day, and things get worse as you get older. Things break down without asking your permission or giving advanced warning. This part begins to wear down. That part begins to wear down. You find yourself with less and less to work with. It gets harder and harder to be up and running. To get over the barrier of that inertia takes a fair amount of passion, which is why we see passion as a good thing. But it's a fire that keeps burning away. The Buddha had a twofold solution to all of this. One is to direct the passion in a skillful direction, learning to get the mind motivated for things that really are helpful, that really do lead to a truly lasting happiness. For the most part, our passions are totally misguided. So the Buddha said to focus your passion in the direction of the Dhamma. Find the happiness that comes from generosity, the happiness that comes from virtue, from being principled in your behavior, and the happiness that comes from meditation. He compares these things to food, and particularly this sense of well-being, rapture, and refreshment that come from getting the mind into a good strong concentration. That's your food and nourishment on the path. It gives you energy. At the same time, his various teachings on the things that can be attained as we practice provide the motivation that gives you the passion for the Dhamma, that helps overcome the inertia that otherwise would keep you from practicing. Beyond that, the Buddha's ultimate solution to the problem is to totally get rid of that inertia, the baggage that weighs the mind down, that we have to fight against in order to accomplish anything. That's why he has us look at our attachments. The Pali word upadhi means baggage, and it derives from a term that nomads would use for all their tents and food and all their other belongings that they would pack on their horses when they picked up and moved on. All your mental belongings are called upadhi. The baggage you carry around with you, the extra weight that creates that dead sense of inertia. This is why we have to look very carefully into the mind, why we practice concentration to give the mind a place where it can see very clearly the steps by which it functions, by which it creates these burdens, this massive load of baggage it's holding on to. Your greed, your aversion, and your delusion, identifying with your body, identifying with your feelings, your perceptions, your thought fabrications, even with acts of consciousness. These things weigh the mind down if you hold on to them. This is the Buddha's ultimate mode of attack when you see the mind holding on to something. The phrase, holding on here, is metaphorical. The mind doesn't have hands that grab things, but it has habits that it keeps repeating over and over again. The places it goes to for its happiness, the things it does again and again and again, partly because it doesn't know any better, partly because it's habitual. Those repeated actions are your attachments. To repeat them is to hold on to them. When we begin to pry into our attachments, we begin to see what creates the mind's inertia. We also see how we can lighten the mind by learning how not to keep going after the ideas that weigh us down, that keep us back, or ways of functioning that keep us back. We let these things go by seeing that they're not worth the bother. They may provide a little pleasure, but that pleasure doesn't compare with the stress and pain they cause. That's why the Buddha has you focus on stress in Ajahn Mahabua's words, the squeeze they put on the mind. They're dead weight on the mind. When you decide you'd rather let them go, the mind gets lighter and lighter. As a result, it has less and less need for passion, because there's less and less inertia for it to overcome. To really comprehend the Buddha's teachings, to appreciate them, you have to think outside the box. When the Buddha says that the mind in nibbana no longer has to feed, it doesn't correspond to our ordinary ideas about pleasure and happiness. Our habitual way of looking for happiness is to keep feeding on sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, ideas, relationships, intentions. And so when he talks about the mind not feeding, it sounds like it's being starved. What's actually happening is that the mind has arrived at such a strong place that it doesn't need to feed anymore. The same with passion. We think a life without passion would be dead and dull because all we know is the inertia of the mind that, if it can't stir up passion, can't do anything. That, in our eyes, is a dead mind. But the Buddha was aware of a state of mind that doesn't have that inertia, that doesn't have that dead weight, and so it can do the wise thing, the helpful thing, the skillful thing, the compassionate thing, with no need for any passion to spur it on. As we're practicing, we have to bring passion to the practice because the mind still has its baggage, a lot of resistance that we have to overcome. That's why the Buddha describes passion for the Dhamma as a good thing on the path. When you find that your efforts are getting slack, you do what you can to remind yourself of why you're here practicing, what the alternative would be if there were no way of training the mind to free it from its burdens, to free it from its fires of passion, aversion, and delusion, the fevers that inflame the mind. By keeping yourself motivated in this way, you use the passion for the Dhamma to replace your other passions, to keep yourself on the path. As you become more and more passionately engaged in the Dhamma, you can see more and more clearly exactly where you've been weighing yourself down. You can drop all the weight. It's like those old balloons that people used to travel in. They'd have big bags full of weights, and when the balloon was ready to go up, they'd drop the weights, and the balloon would rise higher and higher. The same with the practice. As the mind gets lighter and lighter, Your passion gets more refined, and ultimately it's totally weightless, totally free of inertia. That's when you no longer need the passion. It's good to remember that there are a lot of things we value in life because of a lack. We value food because we feel hungry. We value passion because it helps us to overcome our inertia. But when the mind no longer needs to feed on things, it's totally weightless. It looks at food and feels no inclination, for it doesn't need it anymore. It looks at passion and sees it as the Buddha did, pissing on palaces. April 9, 2010. A famous scholarly monk from Bangkok who was very skeptical about the wilderness tradition and about the possibility of getting anywhere in meditation, once went to visit Ajahn Mun and asked him, "Here you are out in the forest, meditating all alone. Where do you go to listen to the Dhamma?" "I'm in Bangkok with famous Dhamma teachers all around, and even then I come up with problems that I can't solve, and they can't solve either. So what hope do you have out here in the forest? Where can you listen to the Dhamma?" And Ajahn Mun's response was, "I hear the Dhamma all the time, 24 hours a day, except when I'm asleep." And the monk replied, "Well, that shows you know how to listen." And it's true. The Dhamma's always proclaiming itself wherever you look. If you look in the right way, listen in the right way, if you tune into the fact that there is Dhamma being taught. Actually, it's not really taught, it's just the way things are. They simply show the way they are by their behavior. As Ajahn Mun said, you see a leaf fall, and it teaches you the principle of inconstancy, impermanence. You hear a monkey call, and what you hear is its pain and suffering. It's all around us. When the Buddha referred to his teaching of the Dhamma and the Vinaya, he'd use different words for how he taught. The Vinaya was something he formulated. In other words, he had to put together the rules for there to be a Vinaya. But the Dhamma is something already there, and so he said that the Dhamma was something he simply pointed out. All he had to do was point it out so that people could see. So this is a skill we have to develop. The ability to hear the Dhamma all the time, to see the Dhamma all the time, so we don't have to be dependent on somebody else to teach us the Dhamma, all the while wondering if the words are true or not. Of course, one of the problems is that we're surrounded in the West by people with lots of anti-Dhamma attitudes, and that includes a lot of Dhamma teachers. But that's the nature of human society in general. To tune into the Dhamma, you have to learn to tune out a lot of the messages that are being sent your way. And that requires a whole set of skills. One is to make sure that your intention is skillful in what you do, say, and think. This is why we recite those passages on the Brahma Viharas every evening. It's not that we're praying to some god to make these things happen, that everybody be happy. And it's not that we believe that simply by wishing it, it's going to be so. As the Buddha once said, if things could be made true simply by wishing and praying, there wouldn't be any poor people, any sick people, any ill people in the world. Actually, the good things there are in the world are there because people have had good intentions and acted on those intentions. So that's what we're doing as we develop goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. We're working on our intentions to make sure that they're straight in line with the Dhamma. Just that much right there helps tune us in, because it focuses on the point that our actions are the important things in the world. What we're doing right here, right now. That's the most important thing. Which is very different from the message that we get from everybody else. The news presented by the media is about what somebody else is doing someplace else. They tell us that that's more important and that you're just a loser sitting here watching TV or listening to the radio or on the web, absorbing what the real actors in the world are doing. Then you get sucked into the illusion that, well, maybe if I send out a message, I'll become an important actor, too. But, actually, the really important things in your life are things that nobody else can know. What you're doing in your mind. This is important because what you do in the mind then becomes the basis for what you say, what you do, what you think. So that's one way to tune into the Dhamma. When you see or hear anything that helps to support that, you know you're seeing and listening to the Dhamma. As for anything that pulls attention away from that, you know you're listening to something that's not Dhamma. This is where you have to develop your equanimity, so you can detach yourself from anti-Dhamma ideas. You need compassion and goodwill so that your detachment doesn't become cold, indifferent, or hard-hearted. But you also need the detachment of equanimity so that you can step back a bit and not get sucked into the ways of the world. Because what do they have? They have gain and loss, and we've seen a lot of this recently. People doing things that they think are going to make them wealthy, to get ahead in life, and it turns out that they're just shooting themselves in the feet. Then there are the things people do for status and praise, but end up causing a lot of suffering for themselves and for the people around them. The things they claim to do for the sake of love and compassion place burdens on the people they say they love. To look realistically at the human condition requires a strong sense of irony. Everybody's motivated by the desire for happiness, and yet look at what we do. We create more misery than any other species on the planet, and we're supposed to be the smartest species. So we need to step back a bit. One of the things I appreciated most about Ajahn Fuang, especially when I first met him, was how, even though he was a Thai person, he seemed to be standing outside of Thai society. He wasn't swept up with the usual Thai cares and concerns. And this is typical of the wilderness tradition in general. It has roots way back in the Buddhist tradition. It's one of the reasons we come out into the wilderness. To get a separate sense of perspective so that we're not spinning around with everybody else. We're standing outside of the spinning. We have to keep reminding ourselves that the things people run after are not really all that real, all that worthwhile. In Sri Lanka there are the remains of ancient forest monasteries, and most of the remains are really plain. They were just brick buildings, and all they have now are the brick foundations. One detail, though, was really elaborate. The stone panels in the urinals. They had bas-relief pictures of palaces on the back panels of the urinals, so that the monks could piss on palaces every day. I suppose I should say that they were pissing with compassion, but no, probably not. They were expressing their disdain, which I think is emblematic of an attitude that's really healthy. You look at all the things that people run after: power, wealth, fame, or as Twiggy once said, all the most horrible things in life. If that's what you're tuned into, you're not going to hear the Dhamma. You've got to tune into other things. You have to tune into compassion, kindness, but not idiot compassion or idiot kindness. You have to train these qualities with discernment so that they don't provide cover for your defilements. This means that, primarily, you have to tune into heedfulness, the sense that your actions really are life-shaping, and you've got to be careful how you act. You can't allow yourself to waste your time over things that are really no use at all. Because the question is, given that life is so short, what are you going to take with you? When I was in New York last month, I gave a series of talks on not-self. In one of the talks I focused on the whole issue of rebirth, and how rebirth was an important teaching on not-self. Everyone looked kind of puzzled, because most people think of the idea of rebirth as the ultimate form of selfing. Not only do you have a self in this life, but it also extends into the next. But the connection between rebirth and not-self comes in the sutta where Ven. Rathapala's talking to King Karavya. The king had asked him, "Why did you ordain? Your family's healthy, you're healthy, you haven't suffered any loss. What would inspire you to go forth?" And Rathapala said, among other things, that the world has nothing of its own, one has to pass on leaving everything behind. And the king said, "Well, how can you explain that? I've got lots of wealth and I can take it wherever I go." And Rathapala replied, "Can you take it with you when you die?" And the king had to admit, "Well, no. When I die, I have to leave everything behind." That's how death teaches not self. But it also teaches you that there are some things that do carry over, that you do take with you. You take your karma, you take the qualities of mind you've developed. So you need to make sure that you've got some good qualities to take with you. What we're living for as meditators is to develop the qualities. In some cases they're called the noble treasures of conviction, virtue, a sense of shame and compunction over the idea of doing something harmful, the willingness to learn, generosity, and wisdom. These are qualities of mind you can take with you, and you don't want to scrounge around for them at the last minute. Death is like being suddenly evacuated with no time to pack your bags. You find yourself swept to a new land, a new place, and all you have are your skill sets. So what skill sets have you been collecting? Focus in on that, listen to that question, keep that question in mind, because that's what enables you to hear the Dhamma in the other things you notice around you. You see other people and some of them are working on good skill sets, while others are working on who knows what. The skills of impatience, entitlement, overweening pride. When you look at them, you should ask yourself, is this something I want to take as a model for my behavior, or is this something I have to learn from as a lesson in precisely what not to do? When you do this, you're not passing judgment on the value of the person, you're looking at the person as a possible guide and deciding whether you want to take that person's actions as a guide to your own. It's not harsh and judgmental to look at people in this way. It's common sense. And the Buddha never said that it was wrong to judge other people. I was reading a book recently that contained a supposed quote from the Pali Canon, where the Buddha says that if you judge other people, you destroy yourself by the root. This statement was even addressed to Ven. Ananda, to give it an air of truthiness. But the whole passage was an interpolation. The Buddha never said that. He actually said that you have to learn how to judge people wisely in terms of the skill or lack of skill in their actions. You need to do this for the purpose of deciding whether you want to take them as an example or not. When you see other people who, through their greed and heedlessness, have destroyed their wealth, destroyed their status, destroyed the company they work for, you can take it as a warning signal. That's a Dhamma lesson right there. When you see someone who's found peace of mind, there's a Dhamma lesson right there, too. The important thing is to detach yourself from the usual snares of the world. They dangle things in front of your face and lead you on, so that you can't really hear the message of the Dhamma. It's like the cartoon in the New Yorker that shows people trudging along on a city street, each with a big stick coming up their back and hanging down in front of them, dangling a carrot in front of their faces. They all look pretty glum. And on the street, there's a guy driving his top-down sports carrot down the road, smiling to himself. We're all going after those dangling carrots, and that's why we don't really see the Dhamma around us. So learn how to step back and put a question mark around the messages you're getting from the people around you, from the media, from whatever the source. Say, okay, is that a Dhamma lesson about what to do or about what not to do? There's got to be a Dhamma lesson in here somewhere. It's like tuning your radio. There are always different radio waves or different frequencies going through the air right now, going through your body right now. If you tune into one frequency, you get classical music. If you tune into another frequency, you get Tijuana. If you tune into another, you get hate radio. It's all there in the air. The question is, to which frequency are you going to tune in? If you tune in properly, you tune into the Dhamma because it's always there, too. But it requires the right attitude. Your desire to be skillful, to search for happiness in a way that embodies goodwill, compassion, and empathetic joy, along with the equanimity that allows you to step back and question any non-Dhamma stations, any non-Dhamma frequencies you encounter. When you learn to tune in your mind just right, you find that the Dhamma is broadcasting, as Ajahn Mun said, 24 hours a day. It's there to listen to. It's there to see whenever you want it if you know how to listen, if you know how to look. What's getting in the way? August 19, 2013. One of the main purposes of listening to the Dhamma is to get a sense of possibilities. We read the life of the Buddha to get a sense of what a human being can do, but all too often his story seems to be Oa therein. Never Never Land, something someone far away in a far distant time was able to do. But to what extent is it relevant to us? To what extent can we make it relevant to what we're doing? It's good to bring that measuring stick up close. What would it be like to have a mind that didn't have any doubts about the deathless? What would it be like to have a mind where there would be no possibility that it would ever be a slave again to sensual desire? What would it be like to be totally free of dilemma and suffering? Do those questions interest you? They should, because they're directly connected with happiness. We have tendencies in our minds that make us miserable, yet we're so used to them that we don't think that things could be another way. This means that we end up looking for our happiness within the con-ness of a very narrow sense of our range, of what's possible for us. That's how we keep ourselves hemmed in. As Ajahn Chah says, it's like being a frog down a little hole. And in northeastern Thailand, what do they do with frogs in holes? They take a long wire and they put a hook at the end, and they stick it down in the hole, and they pull out the frog. And as Ajahn Chah adds, if the hook doesn't get you by the jaw, it's by the ribs, into your guts. The hooks go that deep. If you're hemmed in by your ideas of what you can do, that's your future. Aging, illness, and death are going to come with their hook. They might catch you by the ribs. They might catch you by the jaws. Who knows where they're going to catch you? It's because you hemmed yourself in that you're an easy target. This is why it's good to open your mind to possibilities that you might not have thought of before, and to use the Buddha's measuring stick. Even when he talks about something as simple as concentration. What would it be like to have the mind settle down, so that it gains a sense of rapture, a sense of ease? Don't keep that possibility far away. Ask yourself, where is the potential for rapture right now? Where is the potential for ease right now? It's there. It may not be blatant, but it's there. One way of inducing rapture is to ask yourself, which parts of the body right now feel relaxed or even just okay? When you breathe in, can they maintain that quality of feeling okay, or is there a little squeeze on them? Try noticing your hands. You breathe in, breathe out, and does the ow of energy at any point in the breath cycle put a squeeze on the hands, on any of the muscles in any part of the hand? Can you breathe in a way that doesn't induce that squeeze? How long can you keep that up? And when you can keep it up, can you let it spread up the arms? If you don't like the hands, you can try the feet or any part of the body. Look for the potentials that are here right now. The Buddha says they're here. Everything we need to know for awakening is right here, and yet we don't see it. All we see are the things that we've seen before, because we look at them in the same way we've looked at them before. We don't learn to look at things in different ways. This is why Dogen, the Zen master, said that a large part of meditation is learning how to de-think your thinking. Use different eyes to look at the potentials right here. Ask different questions. Where is the potential for rapture? Where is the potential for ease? Where in the mind is the potential for stillness? What would happen if you developed those potentials and kept at it? When, say, sensual desire does come up in the mind, what would it be like not to give in? And what would the mind need to do to be in a position where it would feel secure that it would never give in? What would that mind be like? These are good questions to ask. They expand our range. The Buddha says that there are several things that, when you think about them or try to get your head around them, you go crazy. Two of them are, what's the range of a person who's attained jhana? And what's the range of a Buddha? We're not here to get our heads around these things. We're here to pose the question of what it would be like to explore some of that range. That's a useful way of thinking. In other words, we can't deny that the Buddha had only these many powers or those many powers, because after all, he was a pretty quiet person in one way, in that there were a lot of things he knew that he wouldn't talk about. Remember his image of the handful of leaves. What he learned in the course of his awakening was like all the leaves in the forest. What he taught was just the handful of leaves. So there's a huge part of awakening that we'll never know about unless we put in the necessary ear to gain awakening ourselves. That was what the handful of leaves is for. To open your mind to the possibility of awakening to total freedom, and to show you how it's done. It's the same with the powers that come from mastering the jhanas. If you gain them, and you're a monk, you're not supposed to talk about them to lay people. You may mention them to other monks, but even then, you have to be very careful. Ajahn Lee was extremely circumspect in this way about what he knew, what his attainments were. He never even told Ajahn Fuang when and where he had gained his noble attainments. And Ajahn Fuang told me that he himself had been very severely chastised by Ajahn Mun over this same sort of issue. He'd be meditating out in the forest and he'd see a mountain, so he wanted to check it out. Who are the devas over there in the mountain? Sometimes he'd mention what he saw to his friends, and even though they were fellow monks, Ajahn Mun came down on him hard. He said, "What you learn in your meditation is your business and nobody else's. So there's a lot we can't know about other people's abilities and attainments. The only way to ND out about what's possible in jhana or in awakening is to master those skills yourself." We look at the teachings in the canon and they seem huge. 45 volumes. Many people suspect that not all of them come from the Buddha, but then, there's an awful lot that seems genuine. Yet even that is just the handful of leaves. So to get to know that handful of leaves, and see what possibilities get opened up by following them. What would that be like? What would it be like to really see, as the Buddha says, that the best way to think about suaring is to see it as the act of clinging to the V-aggregates. By denying suaring in this way, he's giving you a handle on how to understand it, how to take it apart. Yet even just these few leaves we haven't really mastered. There's a huge range of possibilities. As the Buddha said, what he learned and attained didn't come from anything else aside from his ardency, his resolution, his heedfulness, qualities that we can all develop if we want them. So it's good to let the range of the Buddha's knowledge and the idea of a totally pure mind, a totally free mind, capture your imagination, not so that you just think about them, but so that you ask yourself, right now, what am I doing that's getting in the way of knowing those things? What attitudes do I have that are obstructive? Where am I zated right now? What do I like to fantasize about? How's that getting in the way? What would happen if I could drop those things, even for a little while? We've had our imagination distracted by so many useless things in the world, things that have a certain amount of use, but tend to put blinders on us and close our imaginations to the larger things of which the mind is capable, the heart is capable, your heart is capable. An important part of the practice is learning how not to let those obstructions get in the way. How and why we meditate. March 10, 2012. We start with thoughts of goodwill to remind ourselves of why we want to meditate. We want to ND a happiness that's reliable, that doesn't harm us or anybody else. That's why we spread goodwill both to ourselves and to all beings, to remind ourselves that we're looking for a special kind of happiness. Then, when we're clear about why we're doing it, we settle down to business. Here, the business is watching your breath. Take a couple of good long deep in and out breaths and notice where you feel the breathing in the body. You feel the passage of air through the nose, but you also feel the rise and fall of the chest, sometimes the rise and fall of the abdomen or the shoulders. Notice where the feeling of breathing is most pronounced. Allow your attention to settle there and keep it there all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out, and even in the moments between the breaths. As you breathe in, notice if there's any unnecessary tension in that part of the body. It may be that the breath is too long, so that as you get toward the end of the breath it's beginning to feel uncomfortable. Well, allow the breath to grow shorter. Or if it's too short and you feel like you're not really getting the full energy of the breath, allow it to stretch out a bit. In other words, experiment with the breathing to see what feels best. If you ND something that feels good, stick with it. It may feel good for a long time, or it may feel good for just a little while, and then not so good anymore. In that case, try changing it again. Try to keep on top of what the body needs. The purpose here is twofold. 1. To get the mind to settle down in the present moment, and 2. To be observant. The breath is one of the few bodily functions that you can actually change consciously, so try to take advantage of that fact, both for the settling down and for the being observant. If the breath feels good and you ND it, interesting to notice how the way you breathe has an impact on how the body feels. That helps you to stay in the present moment. You start learning about what the breath is doing, and as you learn about the breath, you're going to be able to learn about the mind as well. Because ultimately the breath is not the problem. The real problem lies in the mind. We all want happiness, and yet we choose to do things that can lead to pain, for ourselves or for other people. So there's a disconnect. The question is, where exactly is the disconnect, and why? Sometimes it's because we don't have a very clear knowledge of what our intentions are. Or it may be because we don't really see the connection between our actions and their results. So, starting with the breath, notice what your intention is. You're here for the sake of happiness. You're here to learn how to train the mind so that it doesn't create a lot of problems. And of course, not every part of your mind is going to be cooperative. Some parts are going to wander away with other agendas. So for the time being, you just let them go. In other words, you don't have to get entangled with them. Just notice that there are other thoughts in the mind, not connected with the breath, but you don't have to follow them. That right there is an important insight. You don't have to run after everything that comes up in the mind. Then stick with the breath as long as you can and see what impact it has on the mind and on the body. This is the part of the practice that requires some conviction. It's like making scrambled eggs. The right way to make scrambled eggs is to keep the heat really low. You stand there, stirring the eggs in the pan, and nothing seems to be happening. You feel a very strong temptation to turn up the heat to speed things up, but you have to resist that temptation. Just keep on stirring and stirring and stirring, and after a while the eggs really do begin to coagulate on the bottom of the pan. It's in the period when you don't see any immediate results coming that you need to have the conviction that the cookbook was right. It's the same with the meditation. There are times when you sit in meditation and nothing much seems to be happening. And so you need the conviction to stick with it to give it time to do its work. This is why we have the chants on the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha prior to the meditation. To remind ourselves that this path we're following here is not a brand new path. It's not something we just recently cooked up. In fact, the Buddha himself said he didn't invent the path. He discovered an old path. There had been Buddhas before him, awakened people before him, and this is the same path they all discovered. We have all of the Buddha's awakened disciples guarantee that, yes, this path does work. So you just stick with it. Part of the mind will complain because, of course, the mind still has its greed, aversion, and delusion. It's not the case that you sit down, close your eyes, and they all go away. They hide out for a while, but they're going to come up again. And they're going to complain. They'd rather do this, think that, go here, go there. Just remind yourself that you've been following greed, aversion, and delusion for who knows how long. They do provide some pleasure, but there's usually a lot of pain that goes along with that pleasure, and they leave you holding the bag. And you've been falling for their tricks again and again and again. How about trying something new? New for you at least. Something different. So you just stick with the breath, stick with it, stick with it. As the Buddha said, patient endurance is what burns away a lot of the issues in the mind. It doesn't solve all the problems. The ultimate problems are going to require very renewed discernment. You develop that discernment from your right ear as you practice. So, to develop right ear as a beginning step, you use whatever cruder skills you have at your disposal. Conviction, patience, your stick-to-itiveness. Now, that can get very old very quickly if you don't have something of interest. That's why we emphasize working with the breath. When the breath gets comfortable, the next step is to think of that sense of comfortable breath spreading through different parts of the body. When we talk of breath here, it's not air coming in and out. It's the movement of energy in the body, which is what gets the air to come in and out to begin with. Without that energy, nothing would come in and out at all. So notice, when you breathe in, where do you feel the energy out in the body? If you're really sensitive, that it goes throughout every nerve in your body, from the top of the head, down to the feet, down the shoulders, down the arms, all through the torso, deep into the head, all around. There's even an energy that surrounds the body. So try to make yourself as sensitive as possible to the energy that's happening right here. If you can't feel it everywhere, focus on the areas where you can feel it, where it's most blatant. Eventually, as your sensitivity develops, you'll notice it in areas where you never sensed it before. You'll start to realize that many of the sensations you are familiar with are actually breath sensations. As with any delicate task, this takes time. But if you have something with which to entertain yourself, you find it easier to stick with the task. Here the entertainment is actually part of the work. We've talked about working with the breath. We can also talk about playing with it. It can actually be fun. Start noticing that there are spots, say in your spine, where there's a lot of tension, but if you consciously relax the tension, a sense of awe will go through. It feels a lot more refreshing. You may find that releasing one spot of tension in the body has a chain reaction effect, so that other areas of tension in the body begin to relax as well. This is something that's fun to explore. You may notice that the way you hold your body will change. When the awe of the breath energy in the body is improved, this is going to be good for your posture, good for your health. This is medicine that doesn't cost you anything at all. And as for the work, try to spread your awareness to the whole body, so that eventually you'll be aware of the whole body all the time through the in-breath, all the time through the out. That broadens the range of your awareness, and you begin to see things happening in the mind that you didn't see before. They were hidden in a blind spot because the range of your awareness was very narrow. But as you allow the awareness to broaden out, you begin to see little bits and snatches of thoughts here and there. You can catch sight of the mind's decisions. Usually, in an ordinary mind, there are several conversations going on at once. You may be paying attention to one or two, but there are others going on as well. Every now and then you slip in, add a little something, and then slip right out. Then you can deny what you just did, telling yourself that you didn't do any of that slipping around at all. This is one of the reasons why we don't see the connection between our actions and the suffering we cause. There's a fair amount of denial going on in the mind. But when your range of awareness is all around like this, it's harder to maintain that denial. And it's better for you that you don't. You can begin to see what's going on, and you're in a position to do something about it. Some unskillful thoughts in the mind can hang on simply because you're not paying attention to them. When you see them clearly, it's very easy to let them go. There are others, though, that are going to require more work. What the Buddha calls exerting a fabrication or fabricating an exertion. He uses both phrases. What they both mean is that you have to do some conscious work in order to understand why you're stuck on this particular kind of action or kind of thinking. Then you make the effort to provide the mind with an alternative, a more skillful alternative to the way you've been thinking. And it turns out that the way you breathe is very intimately connected with all of this. It's called bodily fabrication. As I said, it's one of the few functions in the body that you can intentionally change. So you work with that and put it to use. Suppose that anger comes up in the mind. One of the RST things you can do about it is to notice where in the body is the tension that goes along with the anger. Then try to breathe through it. Think of the breath energy as just dissolving that tension away, allowing it to dissipate out into the air, so you don't have to keep carrying it around or you don't feel burdened with the need to get it out in your words or your deeds. As you're working with the breath, you also become sensitive to two other kinds of fabrication the Buddha talked about. One is called verbal fabrication, which is the way the mind talks to itself. It directs its thoughts to a particular topic and then it starts evaluating the topic and deciding what it likes and what it doesn't like, what it wants to do and doesn't want to do with regard to that topic. When you're working with the breath, you're engaging in just that kind of verbal fabrication. You become more conscious of it. You realize that you can change the way you talk to yourself about things, especially when you start getting new perspectives about what's going on in the present moment, as to what's going on in the mind and what's going on in the body. Then there's what the Buddha calls mental fabrication, which are the perceptions, the labels we apply to things, along with feelings. Feeling tones of pleasure, pain, and neither pleasure nor pain. And again, as you're working with the breath, you get hands-on experience in how you can shape these things and use them to shape the state of your mind. When you stick with the breath, you're also holding a particular perception of the breath in mind. If you think of the breath simply as the air coming in and out of the nose, that influences how you're going to breathe and the way you experience the breath. But if you think about the energy in the body as being breath, then it can go anywhere in the nervous system. It can go through anything at all. That gives you another perception. It's going to change the way you actually experience the breath. You can start to think of all those little tiny nerve endings going all the way out to the pores of your skin. They've got breath energy, too. If you hold that perception in mind, how does that change the way you breathe? How does it change the way you feel in the present moment? Does it feel more pleasant? If not, what other perception of breathing can you think of that would? So as you focus on working and playing with the breath, you're getting some conscious experience in learning how to manipulate what the Buddha calls bodily fabrication, verbal fabrication, and mental fabrication, to create a sense of ease within the body and mind. Then you can use those same fabrications to deal with whatever else comes up in the mind. For the time being, you don't want to get too involved in analyzing any distracting thoughts. Work on using these 3 types of fabrication to make your concentration as solid as you can. After a while, though, as you get skilled at these types of fabrication and you feel solid in the present moment, you can turn and look at whatever in the thought seems so attractive. You can start analyzing the thought in terms of the 3 types of fabrication. How are you breathing in relation to the thought? What things are you saying to yourself that give rise, say, to greed or aversion or delusion? What are the perceptions or mental labels lying behind these thoughts? And what kind of feelings surround them? Can you change those things? Fabricate something different so that when an incident comes up in your life that you would normally react to with anger, can you refabricate your reaction? Something that would give rise to lust. Can you refabricate that so that the aversion, the anger, the lust don't hold any appeal? 2 things help to cut through that appeal. First, simply having access to a greater sense of well-being as you work with the breath and play with the breath, gives the mind sense of hunger, just wanting some action, wanting some entertainment, less of an edge. Second, you see that the way you normally react is optional, it's causing stress that doesn't need to be there. You see that you're creating an awful lot of the situation just by the way you're looking at it, and if it's causing stress, well, why not look at it in a different way? Why not breathe around it in a different way? Perceive it in a different way? Evaluate it in a different way? These are some of the lessons you can learn by working and playing with the breath like this, allowing the mind to become more settled in the present and to see things a lot more clearly. You come to understand this process of how you fabricate your experience, and you can use that understanding to eliminate all the stress that the fabrication creates for the mind. This is one of the Buddha's major insights. There's an analysis of suffering and stress called dependent co-arising, which describes all the different factors that, based on ignorance, give rise to stress and suffering. Half of them, including the 3 types of fabrication, come prior to sensory contact. Even before you see something or hear something, the mind is already primed to create suffering out of it if it's operating under the power of ignorance. What we're doing here is learning how to bring knowledge to those processes so that we're no longer priming ourselves for suffering and stress. We're priming ourselves to put an end to it, which is in line with our original intention. We want to be able to see why the actions we do for the sake of happiness end up leading to stress and how we can change those ways so that we can actually act in a way that leads to true happiness. We break things down into very simple components so that we can manage them. We realize that this is a problem we can manage. That's the good news of the Buddha's teachings. That even though we may be causing ourselves stress and suffering, we can put an end to it. If our suffering really were caused by things outside that were beyond our power, then there'd be no hope. Or if it were caused by things we were doing that we couldn't change, there'd be no hope, either. But here we're making choices. We're probably not making them all that wisely, but we do have some wisdom. We do have some discernment. It's just a matter of applying it, giving it a foundation here in the present moment, and then really using it to look carefully to see. Where are we creating unnecessary stress and suffering for ourselves? What can we do to change? It's by using our wisdom and discernment with these basic, immediate things, exercising them with these questions, that they develop and grow. When the mind is well settled and well centered like this, it fosters a sense of well-being. That sense of well-being is important. If, when you're feeling down on yourself and you're already feeling uncomfortable inside, you'll do nothing but criticize yourself, and that can be a dead end. But when the mind feels at ease, with a sense of fullness and well-being here in the present moment, then you can bring up the fact that you've got some habits here that are not all that skillful, and you're in the mood to tell yourself, let's do something about them. The mind is then a lot more willing to listen and to work on the problem. So these are our basic skills. These are our basic components into which we break things down, so that we can understand how we can put them back together in a better way. Then the things that we tend to cling to, the habits we tend to fall into over and over again, that are leading to sewering and stress, we can take them apart. We can then put everything back together again in a better way that turns into a path that, unlike our normal life, doesn't just keep going around and around and around and around in feedback loops. This is a path that actually goes someplace that's really worth going to. And here again, this is where conviction is important. The state the Buddha described as health, nibbana, is something he can't pull out of his heart to show to us. So we're not in a position where we can wait to accept things only when we know them for sure. We have to bring some conviction to what he says. On the one hand, we have to take his word for it when he talks about the kind of commitment it requires. On the other hand, he doesn't have the role of being a God who can tell us what we have to do. But he does say he's an expert in putting an end to sewering. That requires some conviction on our part. But it's not a conviction devoid of reason. What he says is very reasonable. But to follow him requires a lot of commitment. It's a path that requires an awful lot of attention and a lot of persistence, patience. You really do have to commit yourself to this. We're working on a big problem, and it takes time and ear to break the big problem down to manageable bits so we can understand. Oh, this is why I've been doing this all along. And here's an alternative. So the path does ask a lot, but it owes a lot as well. And if you think of the alternative just continuing to sewer again and again in your old ways, it makes sense to give this path a sincere and serious try. In harmony with the Buddha's guidance, we stress the immense importance of sharing wisdom expansively. Presently, we've transformed this extensive 1,000-page work into a readily accessible audio format. The duty to advance this noble cause now lies with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and the sharing of our content, you play a central role in the widespread dissemination of these teachings, benefiting numerous others. Let's continue the timeless tradition of knowledge sharing and the cultivation of mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We extend an invitation for you to join us in this endeavor, and together, we can bring profound positive change to the lives of many.